Hey, all you whiskey fans. Today we're going to talk about sherry. And I don't know about you, I've tasted and enjoyed a lot of whiskeys aged in a sherry cask, but I haven't really bought, seen, or tried a lot of sherry. And I think it's really interesting, so let's dive into it. Where does sherry come from? And how do we use it? What barrels do we use? Let's dig into it. Now, I don't know if you have looked into this yourselves. I found it a very complex and very interesting subject because, again, there are so many whiskeys and so many delicious whiskeys which are finished and using sherry in the finishing or aged the entire time in a sherry cask. And here's another one here as an example. And they're amazing. So much flavor, kind of those wine, grapey fruits, maybe a little bit of sweetness in there. Very cool stuff. And I will make a video about it later, but there's so many different types of sherry, and different types of sherry have different flavors in them. Some people love this one, some people hate it. And it's a whole group of kind of finishes on its own. It's not just sherry in general, how you might have ex-bourbon in general. We don't know where it came from. Is it a Jim Beam barrel? Is it Wild Turkey barrel? We have no idea. We just know it's ex-bourbon. But sherry, we get really deep into it. So let's go even one step deeper. From what I can tell and what I know, sherry barrels, well, there's not a whole lot of them out there because in the production of sherry, you do something, or the way that you age it is actually in a Solaris system. Now, this system means that you kind of have a whole bunch of barrels, and at the top you have a lot more, at the bottom you've got less and less, and you pour the sherry in at the top, and then it slowly starts to trickle its way down. And after a span of years, usually about 2 years or so, you take the whiskey all the way out of the bottom barrel. And it's not a common thing to swap out or get rid of those barrels. They usually stay in there for a good long time. So if that's the case, A, there's not a lot of them. B, how do we get these barrels? And C, how can there be so many products which are then using them? Because there's not that many barrels. Now, it's very interesting. So before we dive into the details of it, let's go a little bit back in time and talk about the history of sherry barrels. I thought it was hilarious because it's kind of like bourbon. It used to just be that when sherry was being shipped around the world, they would, of course, fill it into a barrel like they would almost all liquids, and then ship that barrel to all around the world in another wooden barrel. So it's not the same barrels which are used in the Solaris system. No, they're actually just shipping containers, essentially. And what changed is that in 1981, a new rule was passed by Spanish government banning the shipping of sherry in an actual wooden barrel. So what happened is, for years, we were getting these, let's call them authentic sherry barrels, which, maybe there's sherry in there for a month, 2 months, we really don't know, but it was just a means of transportation. Once that dried up, and overnight when this regulation got passed, it just all ended. Well, what are we going to do? There's a huge demand and a love for sherry finishes and sherry whiskeys. What's the world going to do? What's a guy going to do if I want to get some whiskey like that? So what actually happened is that sherry producers started to partner with new French and American oak barrel manufacturers and started to make, this is going to sound really unauthentic, but I guess it's the best you could do with the situation that we're in. Kind of like, I won't say fake, but you want to make sherry barrels. Not because in the process of making sherry you would ever use the barrel like this, but because there was so much demand and the world needed it. So, what did they do? They would take sherry, a wine essentially, and fill it into a barrel and leave it in this barrel, brand new oak barrel, for we don't know exactly how long, but the running average I've seen is around 2 months. And 2 months kind of makes sense. Like if you fill a barrel of sherry and you take that and you ship it to another country, it's probably been in the barrel for 1 or 2 months, which, okay, adds up. Now where it gets a little bit interesting is that sherry that they use to age in that barrel will never actually be sold, or as far as I can tell, is almost never sold as sherry, as actual sherry. That is just a product that they use to coat the inside of a barrel. So as back in the day, the sherry would go through the Solera system, would be a fully developed product, and then go into the barrel. New sherry barrels are just sherry or wine, depends how you look at it, filled into a barrel for 2 months. Now, it gets even a bit more complicated if you choose to go so deep and get geeky in it. Okay, what do? Do they take that sherry, put it into one barrel, and then throw it away or use it to make a different product afterwards? Maybe, but you don't know. It could actually be, and from what I found, it's very common, to take the contents of one barrel, you fill that one barrel, let's say barrel number 1, for 2 months. Then you take that same sherry and you pour it into barrel number 2. And then number 3 and number 4, which means the longer and longer that same sherry's been used to add sherry flavor to a barrel, you're probably at the end of its life. I mean, who knows how deep they go. From what I found, 5 years to 7 years is kind of, fills is kind of normal. At that 7th fill, I think you get very little sherry flavor and a lot of wood flavor, because a new barrel gives a lot of oak right away. So it's interesting. I'm really, for instance, even this barrel here, they do a very good job right there in the middle, telling you that it's a first fill sherry barrel, which sounds great. But again, you got to ask yourself, and the whiskey tastes delicious. It's here in my glass now. I'm a huge fan of it. But you got to ask yourself, okay, that sherry, is it real sherry? Is it the first time that sherry has been used? I mean, there's so many questions to dive into. So with this in mind, and now knowing that not all sherry barrels are the same, and even the same sherry barrel from the same manufacturer can vastly change and vary, I would suggest that you ask some questions next time that someone tells you, hey, this is a delicious sherry finished whiskey, it's the best I've ever had, and they go on and on too much about the sherry, and they don't talk about the whiskey, which I think happens a lot, and usually it's great. But after doing my research, my brain was just flying with questions, and I think if you're able to ask them, and someone's actually able to answer these questions, you're going to have a much better understanding of this sherry. So first, I would ask, okay, tell me about the sherry, tell me about the production, tell me about the sherry manufacturer. These are usually typical questions. They probably know the answers to them, no problems. Then ask, was that sherry used in filling the barrels? I think they're going to stutter, and they probably won't know the answer to it, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you know a great guy who really is selling and promoting a great barrel of whiskey. So, was that same sherry used in that barrel to give the flavor to the barrels? How long was it in the barrel? How many times was that sherry used in treating or adding that sherry flavor to a barrel? First fill, second time filled, third time filled, not the barrel, the sherry. And finally, I mean, it might be interesting to note that you can get both American oak and French oak in these productions. There's some sherry manufacturers which have a preference. However, I wouldn't be surprised if many times they're just going with the cheapest option. So you might be surprised, even if it's a completely different product or a completely, let's say, European product or European brand that's pretty well known for using French oak, you might be surprised. It could be American or vice versa. It's always worth asking, always worth learning. And I feel like with questions and whiskey knowledge like this, that glass that you enjoy just tastes a lot better. My opinion. Hey guys, cheers. I hope you liked it. I'm probably going to talk more about sherry in the future, but this is just general kind of sherry information, not so much flavors, not so much how it's done, or let's say different types of sherry, but just sherry barrels in general. Hope you liked it. Cheers to you and your next glass of whiskey, with or without the sherry.